All right. So let's get going. Um, so I think everybody here knows Project Prakash, but here's one child, one Prakash child. So notice the dense cataracts in Gaurav's eyes. And you're going to see Gaurav pre-operatively when his vision is light perception, and then post-op. And we asked Gaurav, as we often ask many Prakash children, to find a box of chocolates that we put by the side of the corridor. So notice his shuffling gait and the difficult time that he has trying to find the box. This is about a week after surgery. So that's Gaurav. Here's another nice video, a little girl named Sarika. So notice not just the dense cataracts, but also the strong strabismus. So this is Sarika post-op, and she's playing with a boy named Junaid, who was also a Prakash child who was treated 4 or 5 years before this video is being made. So this is Sarika's day to go home after spending about 2 weeks with us at the hospital. We've given her a doll as a going away present, and she's running to the Prakash room to pick up her glasses. There she goes with her glasses. So the doll, just on that tangent of the doll, we didn't realize that the doll was actually one that would sing when the right button was pressed. So when I bought the doll, I didn't notice that button, but Sarika very quickly did. And she pressed that button and the doll started singing very loudly, and it was singing very risque song. So we tried to pull the batteries out. Sarika was not having it. So she
blind people shopping to buy toys so that they can find all the little like buttons.
So I can only imagine on the train ride home when Sarika is listening to the doll singing these very bawdy songs. Okay, so well, Prakash has been doing this work for the past about 20 years. We have treated over 500 children. One of the commonalities across all of these children, so the outcomes are very varied, but one thing that can be said without any ambiguity is that the acuity outcomes of the Prakash children are always subpar. So they are always worse than 2020. They could be like 2100, 2400 even, never 2020. In fact, this is such a consistent finding that we take it as an indication that the deprivation was congenital. If a child ends up with near normal acuity, then it's very likely that the child did not have deprivation right from the outset. This is the target or intervention that we would like to work towards. So the reason we believe that acuity, intervening for acuity is important, it's kind of for the obvious reason. So if you look at the animal kingdom and you see what is the primary purpose to which high acuity vision is put. The primary purpose is not for examining things up close in great detail. Rather, high acuity extends the range of vision. So the animals with the highest acuity are birds of prey, who have acuity about 3 times better than us, like 20/6 acuity. For them, being able to spot even a little prey animal very far away, that's what high acuity is helping them do. By the same token, having access to high acuity extends our range of vision. So my ability to recognize Ashini would be severely compromised if I had low acuity vision, then I would need Ashini to be much closer to me. So by having a Prakash kid have 20/200 vision, for instance, we've essentially cut off a lot of the distance over which they would have been able to function if only they had better acuity. So for that reason, we would like to see if anything can be done to improve acuity. So here's where the very speculative section of these thoughts begins. What we know for a fact is, yes, acuity needs to be improved. Now, how do we go about doing that? So we turn for inspiration to a topic that I know very little about, but Pete knows a great deal about, amblyopia. So amblyopia it can be described in a few different ways. One is an unexplainable loss of acuity, primarily acuity, but you can also think of contrast sensitivity in an eye that looks normal. So just the physical examination of the eye signals that nothing is wrong, but the child has an acuity loss that cannot be corrected by optical means. And this is a very prevalent condition. About 2% of all children across the world are affected by it. The Prakash case, the reason we are looking at amblyopia, the Prakash cases can be thought of as uniocular amblyopia times 2. So most of the time, amblyopia, as it manifests in this country, is one eye that's significantly weaker than the other eye. So you might have normal vision in one eye and amblyopia in the other. In fact, even the definition of amblyopia is sometimes differential vision in the two eyes, with the weaker eye being called the amblyopic eye. So to the extent that perfectly focused images in the amblyopic eye are not being resolved to their full extent, is somebody pinging? Is there chat?
No, it was a phone.
Might be someone's.
Oh, okay. So to the extent that amblyopia is characterized by seemingly normalized, where you can have perfectly focused images on the retina and yet have the child be unable to resolve the patterns, that is essentially what's going on in the case of the Prakash children. You can have the best optical correction possible, and yet the child is unable to resolve details.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry?
Is this just empirically measured best resolution on the retina based on having them read letters on an eye chart, or what is the
Yes. Yeah, so some kind of a Snellen chart, some optotypes, no matter what optical correction you place in front of them, their acuity won't exceed some, say, 20/100 or some such number.
I have a question. So this is something that I only recently kind of started to think about, and maybe it's a screwy question, but given kind of how CBI is defined, where is the boundary between, especially if you're talking about binocular amblyopia and CBI? What's the difference?
So with CBI, you have some biological site that you can point to as being affected.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because I was just watching one of Blackley's talks.
Mhm.
It was my impression was that first of all the eye seems to be intact.
Yeah,
the
eye,
itself,
yep.
right, and so it's brain based. But he said a few times that basically the way that you diagnose it is by process of elimination. You can't find something else that accounts for it, so you don't necessarily really have a biological target for the reason. I don't know if the diagnostic criteria is starting to change or
So,
That was my.
so CBI, and I would defer to Pete's take on this. There's typically something non-visual that also afflicts the child. So it's clear that this is a brain, not just the visual component of the child's abilities are being affected, but other aspects too. There might be tremor, there might be other cognitive impairments that the child undergoes. That's not the case with amblyopia. So amblyopia, the child is otherwise almost completely normal. It's just vision that's affected. Pete,
There are always structural deficits in
There are always
CBI.
structural.
Yeah, I think maybe a lot of people are referring to other kinds of deficits, whether they were autism spectrum disorder or some other diagnostic category that could be used. But it would have to have a structural problem.
And structural in the brain, not
Brain,
in,
yeah,
not
yeah, in the brain.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so in amblyopia, given that it's almost always a uniocular condition, at least as manifested here. The cases of uniocular amblyopia are, they far outweigh the cases of binocular amblyopia. This might be caused by, say, conditions like one eyelid drooping a little too far and thereby occluding vision in one eye relative to the other eye, and the brain privileging the unoccluded eye as being the dominant eye. There might be strabismus, there might be unequal refractive error in the two eyes. The first image, by the way, is Paris Hilton.
Is she an amblyop?
Huh?
Is Paris Hilton an amblyop?
She, yeah. Funding opportunity. Yes. So given that amblyopia is typically characterized by weakness in one eye, the intervention for amblyopia involves forcing the weak eye to work a little harder by patching the good eye. So that's what you see in this. This is, Pete, would it be fair to say that this is probably the go-to treatment for amblyopia?
The main treatment.
Yeah. And this treatment has been with us for the past many decades, and we've not come up with anything more effective or better.
Well, I mean, that is because it works. The goal is to get 20/20 or 6-inch vision in both eyes. So
Great. This
it does.
great. Yeah. This is. I won't dwell on this, but
Can I throw a
Yeah.
tiny anecdote? So
Yeah.
I, as part of the clinical trial that failed out, my right eye has gone totally differential from my left. And I was talking to the optometrist and saying, I think I should patch or something. And they said, I don't think there's enough plasticity that it matters. I think that's just a childhood thing. I'm not sure, but like there's a bit of a weird differential opinion that I've gotten falling through the system.
There's some very interesting anecdotes. Dick was telling me about this personal friend of his who had amblyopia and then lost his good eye at the age of about 80. Lost his good eye. So now his amblyopic eye has to pull the whole load of vision, and the vision in that eye improved.
Right. Yeah, mine has been swapping during because the clinical trial hit the lower one. It actually restored, so it was better. 9 months and like full brain mode switch, and then crashed out. And so now I'm full switching to the other direction. It's quite tumultuous. But I don't know how to stabilize the ship. But there's some lived experience if you have any questions about the inner experience of it.
So until what age is amblyopia treatment still provided?
12.
12.
And they treat people older, but it takes a lot longer. So they might try up till 18.
I see.
By then people will want.
I see. Ashley?
And then when they patch the eye, does the amblyopic eye get worse? Like,
The non-amblyopic eye, you mean?
No,
So
the
they're-
one that's patched.
The one that's patched.
Yeah, that's the good eye. You're patching the good eye.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. So there's the eye that's worse from the get-go.
Mhm. That gets
improves
better.
that. Oh, so you patch the good.
Yeah, you're patching the good eye. With the idea you're forcing the weak eye to work. But if you patch too much, then you have the chance of making the good eye become too weak.
So how many hours a day do you patch?
Two.
Yeah.
And have to do near work games or
So the difference between the eye, I mean, Tracy, you probably know, the difference between the eye tells us something about what we call the depth of suppression. So the poor eye is really taken out of the visual perception day to day, because otherwise, so it prevents the double vision. And that difference between the eyes dictates your treatment regime. So how long, what type of patches, optometrism, orthoptist they use different measures in order to determine the duration and patching regime. Basically, you think it's there somewhere?
Yeah, I think basically the way that we treat now is based off of something called like the ATS studies. There's quite a few of them, but what they found was that if you have like a lower, if you have like a not as bad version of amblyopia, you end up having to patch less. And then if you have a worse version of amblyopia, which is typically defined as like 2100 or worse, then you have to patch a little bit longer. So it's a difference of like 2 hours versus 6 hours. And then they found that that really has a huge benefit. I think a lot of people, they like to try glasses first, and then they try patching, and then they might try other interventions if at that point they're not getting down to 20/20, which is what they're aiming for. So it kind of changes according to like what the outcome is. So there's multiple follow-ups, and you kind of just gauge where the person is at that point.
And once you reach like a certain level of outcome, do you ever see deterioration again later in life, or is it relatively stable from that point on?
I mean, from my experience, I haven't, but I have limited experience too, because I do my residency and I went straight into doing research.
Yeah.
But from what I've seen, I haven't seen that. And I have seen that people did have plasticity at later points in their lives. Basically, pretty much everyone did improve, even if they had intervention later on. There is something that can happen where if you have extended amount of patching, you actually end up having sort of like a rebound effect when they stop patching. So it kind of, you have
That
to
makes
like
sense, yeah.
consider all that as well.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Rebound effect?
So like if somebody is patched for too long, or if they have something where they stop patching, sometimes people get worse, and then they have to go back and kind of revise how they're treated to sort of get to a stable place.
The amblyopic guy gets worse?
Yeah, it can actually.
Ah.
Yeah. So it doesn't always happen. It's kind of rare, but it can happen.
So certainly the time aspect of the patching regimen is an interesting and an important one. The time that you are patching, what age you can patch until. But what I wanted to dwell on here is the philosophy of patching. So the philosophy that one is appealing to is that you have a dominant entity, which is the good eye. And you're trying to undo that dominance by patching the good eye. Hi.
This is my friend, Nicola.
Nicola. Hi.
And he's my neighbor,
And I'm an economist visiting the MIT.
And he-
Only.
doing a sabbatical
Oh, wow.
at MIT.
Yeah.
So-
I've written about this, and so I just wanted to no more.
And maybe we can offer him a drink.
Of course. Yeah. What would you like?
I'll try later.
All right. No, but we can pass some red wine over to you.
I don't want you to think that I came for the wine.
He came for the wine.
It's okay. It's okay. Thank you.
I come for the economic mystery of how Pawan has kept this thing going for so long. Like, there's an economic research project in this.
So the nugget that I'm taking away from the patching and the success of patching is that if you try to undo the dominance, say in this case, the ocular dominance, then you have a solution for amblyopia. In the case of the Prakash children who have bilateral amblyopia, it's not one eye dominating over the other. Rather, if one were to, so both eyes are about equally deprived, both eyes are ending up with subpar acuity. So there isn't the notion of a good eye and a weak eye. Both eyes are.
But Pawan, I do have to say that we do, when we do the separate left and right, we do sometimes in some children find significant differences, and it might be worth considering in those specific children.
Yep. For sure, but there are also many cases where you have balanced deprivation, the cataract density is the same, and you have roughly equal outcomes. So in that case, what is dominating and what can be quote unquote patch? So there, so this is conventional patching, where you are patching, these are contrast sensitivity functions, and you're patching the good eye in order to force the weak eye to work. But when we talk about, I'm going to skip through this. When you're talking about both eyes being compromised, then one could conceptually think of the dominance as occurring between the low spatial frequencies and the high spatial frequencies. So in both eyes, the low spatial frequencies are dominating over the high spatial frequencies. So might it make sense to now patch in the domain of spatial frequencies and force the high spatial frequencies, which are the weaker component of the visual experience of the child, to do the hard work. So just as we are forcing in the case of unilateral amblyopia, we are forcing the weak eye to work. Can we force whatever cells remain that respond to high spatial frequencies, can we force them to work by suppressing the low spatial frequencies? Kyle?
Can you help me understand what spatial frequency means?
Yeah, so spatial frequency, so if you were to do a 2D Fourier transform on a given image, you have low spatial frequencies. Much of the energy is in the low spatial frequencies, but then there's also energy in the high spatial frequencies, the details, the fine-grained details. So if you were to do a high-pass filter of an image, then you would essentially be cutting down on the low spatial frequencies and be left with the high-frequency details. So that's the idea.
And Pawan, how does this, maybe this is a bit of a jump, but like, how does this work with the idea of potentially like low spatial frequency training initially so that we can increase?
So yeah, so that goes in the converse direction.
Right.
This is you're actually removing low
That's
spatial
why I'm
frequencies.
asking, since it almost contradicts each other.
Right. So let's keep that on the back burner for the moment. Just for, I think that's a very interesting point. Let's see if we can get to it.
So why should this technique should work? Just curious that you're trying to get the most of like 90% power of the simulation.
Yep.
The remaining 10% you think is kind of close to patching. Like how would that, but patching seem to work. But why would this work?
We have no idea whether this is going to work. This may be completely going in completely the wrong direction. But I'm just trying to take inspiration from this notion of patching the dominant entity. That entity for uniocular amblyopia is an eye, and that entity for binocular amblyopia we are saying could be low spatial frequencies.
And I'm thinking convolutions more than Fourier space filtering. I could see relating to distance. Like you said, acuity, moves the radius of how well you can resolve objects.
Yep.
And so filtering in this spatial dimension, which is sort of resolution, I would suspect would have something. And I just don't know if filtering in Fourier space would correspond to filtering in resolution in some way.
I think it would, because when things are at a distance, they are migrating into the higher and higher spatial frequencies. And if you are filtering in the Fourier space, so you're doing high-pass filtering, you are actually preserving this high spatial frequency information that could be coming from high distances.
Has anyone ever tried in like neurotypical to do this some kind of this type of training and see if you can like increase, like linear acuity?
So for precisely those kinds of questions, I'm so glad that Peter's here.
Landing into the boat.
But so we lean on Pete in just a moment. But the idea is this.
In theory.
So with conventional amblyopia, you have a dominant eye, weak eye. With bilateral amblyopia, you have two weak eyes, but you have dominant spatial frequencies. And what we would want to do is this. Conventional amblyopia, getting rid of the dominant eye. Bilateral amblyopia, getting rid of the dominant frequencies. Charlie?
This is another crazy idea, but I also like that idea, and I also think it's a little crazy. But I also have no idea what to expect out of it. But I'm wondering if you could somehow increase like surround suppression in the visual cortex. Would you, in these children, would you expect to see? Because then you would sort of sharpen edges. Would you expect to see increase in acuity? I don't know how you would do that, but in theory, if you
I mean, the kind of studies that Mark Webster has done, where you judge the blurriness of an image in a blurry context. Then if you put a picture of a face with a blurry noise around, then it looks crisper, sharper. And if you adapt to low spatial frequency, just to look at the subsequent normal face, then it looks sharper. So you get super sharp effect.
I think you have the high frequency added to the original image one or multiple times to potentiate the high frequency components to make the the frequency spectrum like almost flat.
Yeah. So this is I'll show you some of the. So this is like the spectrum of naturalistic images, and what we're saying is just low pass filter it, let the high pass go through, and this is what it would look like. This is a high pass version of a natural scene. Now, initially, a child who has bilateral amblyopia will have a very hard time, presumably, trying to make any sense of these kinds of images. But it's a big but if some of this high frequency information is actually reaching the brain, and for whatever reason, it's not making its way into the child's behavioral repertoire or into his or her conscious awareness, then we have a chance of somehow potentiating this information by forcing the brain to only make use of this high spatial frequency information. And it's for the ability to present this kind of filtered world that VR becomes pertinent. So how do we do this? Ashni actually mentioned something quite intriguing, that there may be optical ways to filter the world to make high frequency content. I'm still not convinced that that's feasible, but maybe it is. Have you ever come across?
I haven't seen an optical one.
Yeah, there are new like nanomaterials that you can make that definitely can accomplish 1D filter, sorry, that can accomplish very low fidelity spatial filtering now. So with some effort and planning, I could see a way to make a film that could possibly cut off some low frequencies so you can try to do this using just like glasses instead of VR so
That would be mind blowing. I still can't imagine that, but short of that, I think VR does provide the possibility of in real time, as Caden has already done, in real time, filtering the experience and presenting only the high frequency details. So the basic approach would be this. You measure the acuity of, say, a Prakash kid prior to the intervention, and then you have, say, 4 weeks of frequency patching. These are all made-up numbers, but inspired somewhat by the amblyopia patching regimens. And then you measure acuity again. And if there is any merit to this idea, then hopefully you would see some acuity improvements.
Is there a reason why you shouldn't do it on non-Prakash kids that have just one eye while they're patched?
Yeah, so that's right. So that's an interesting question. And I would think that this notion of frequency patching may well apply even to cases of conventional amblyopia. Yeah.
But I think, like he said, because the current treatment works, I don't know if you want to actually take away more information. It might be a little bit of a problem.
It works in most cases, and when it doesn't work, then those are the interesting cases.
Okay.
What I ask is there anything you could say about the evidence for how the improvement goes? Is there structure to the spatial, the acuity improvement, or steps in the acuity improvement?
By structure, so what generally happens is if the child comes in every, well, in the US it's every 6 months, right? But in Europe it's every 2 weeks they come in to be for acuity, and there's a gradual improvement in acuity in the amblyopia. So it's gradual.
Right, but there's no correlation between what the child, for example, has been doing in terms of coursework or games or something, and the nature of the imagery that's provided, and the steps of improvement, the differences in
really been studied, I don't think, systematically, because children do what they want to do and not what they're told to do.
There's treatment time I saw last year at Harvard. So by the way, there are medical device companies who do something like that, actually. And one post I remember, they found a correlation testing time. So children are not little adults, and the exposure time to any form of treatment, whether it's a gamified version or something like that, was correlated with their child. You're just unsurprising, right? The more exposure you have, next to the learning effect itself, right? If you do something, reinforcement learning makes you better at that. So there's that. I think another point I want to add here is, right now we are really focusing on visual acuity, which is basically the end-piece cutoff of the sensitivity function. Whereas I think your question alluded to is there are other visual functions which are impaired, like binoculars or depth perception, and maybe even beyond these things. Right? When we are looking around, do we really care about these types of functions? That will probably care more about object, faces, motion. The complexity of our data vision is actually beyond that simple vision. So I think, these types of visual functions. I mean, you know more about this, but I definitely know binocular visual functions are affected, and even beyond binocular visual functions, we might see worthwhile biomarkers for change through treatment or lack of change. Actually, I know of a few studies in binocular vision where we know acuity improves, but intraocular suppression or binocular vision may not improve in different dimensions. So that's worth noting that the behavior measure for claiming improvement might be not a good measure right now.
Yeah. So at the very least, we need to go beyond Snellen acuity. I mean, this just that intercept of the contrast sensitivity function. I mean, the contrast sensitivity function, using that as an outcome measure would already be a step up. from just going with acuity. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And I think Pawan, like, if we take a step back for a second into the Prakash kids, where we've been at this point where we're saying, yes, we need to already start to provide some kind of intervention and rehabilitation, but we are rightfully concerned about intervening in ways that are not evidence-based. One thing that's very, very clear, especially from the literature in the past few years from studies, like Jan said, where there are improvements with just any kind of intervention or any kind of treatment. Like, these children need to, in those first couple of weeks, be interacting with simple video games. They need to have active visual learning. And I am sure that will, that they'll have much better outcomes. I don't know if it'll be measured in acuity, but I'm sure they'll have much better outcomes than.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I do believe that we ought to target contrast sensitivity because so
do that more, focus for sure.
Right. The fact that all of the Prakash children are ending up with subpar CSF and subpar acuity, we do need to intervene there. It's a very crisp kind of an outcome.
Yeah, no, it's not one instead of the other. For sure, you have to. But
what's your evidence that low spatial frequencies are
dominating? We don't even have evidence that the high spatial frequencies are even making their way to the brain. So that's experiment one.
But you can infer that from their ability to see high spatial frequency gratings, can't you?
Not necessarily. So imagine this is outlandish, but it's kind of the result that one gets from neonates, where the sweep VEP protocol shows that they have higher acuity than the behavioral, the preferential looking. So if it's the case that the high spatial frequencies are making their way to the brain, but are not becoming manifest in the child's perceptual experience, then we have a shot at doing something, and I don't know what, to try to bring that information into the perceptual experience.
Yeah, no, I think it's likely that you could increase gain or some kind of well-known mechanism. You could increase the contrast response of high spatial frequencies through repeated treatment. But I'm not sure what the evidence that the presence of low spatial frequencies is to inhibit that. And there could be a risk that that the low spatial frequencies would augment the response.
And the reliance on the low spatial frequencies and suppression of the high spatial frequencies that could result.
It could be detrimental.
But don't you think the resources allocated for low spatial frequencies could be shifted to start processing high spatial frequencies? If we just play with the cutoff frequency, for instance, gradually, to let the high frequency gradually go into the brain.
I mean, if you based on current models of either V1 receptive fields, then the response you would get from high spatial frequencies would be through the tail of high spatial frequency filters to the low spatial frequency content in there, and then you would. But I don't see why that would be inhibitory. The only evidence I can think of is there's a paper by Derek Arnold, about 2 years ago, where he argued that there's an inhibition between Magnol and Parva. This is the story I value, but it's one that he's pushed. And in this case, if you adapt to dynamic noise and then you measure someone's acuity, it's higher. They get improved acuity through that. And this is consistent with the kind of argument you're developing here, where if you attenuate the response of, in Derek's approach, adapting to the noise attenuates magnocellular ganglion cells and pathways, which are inhibiting larval ones. And then by attenuating through adaptation, then that inhibition is released. Something like that might be evidence. The guy in Minnesota has had people walking around with bandpass filtered stimuli in virtual reality. I think his name. Anyone?
Gordon Legg?
Not Gordon, no. But I think it's I'll have to look at this. But anyway, he had people walking around with presumably for bandpass filters, lenses, headmounted displays, and then showed changes in contrast gain controls. Steve Engel.
Yeah.
So that would be a good place to start.
I see. Yeah, I would certainly check that out.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the dynamic noise, because that is my experience.
The visual snow.
To put it very crudely, I have a lot of poetry to describe the subjective thing that's happening. But yeah, it's the thing called visual snow. Charles Bernay.
He's really interested in that.
Yeah, just this week we submitted a paper.
Oh, okay.
So
We should chat about that.
the Lincoln illusion kind of phenomena, where you have a highly pixelated image of Lincoln, and because of those high frequencies, you have a hard time interpreting the low frequency content of that image. So there, the interference is going from the high frequencies to low frequencies. So you weaken the sharp edges of the pixels, and you begin to see Lincoln's face quite clearly.
I mean, the premise of what you're saying is there's a competition between them, but it's really that the signal is embedded all over the stimulus, and you're just shifting signal to noise ratio in different parts of the image.
Yeah.
And so the Lincoln illusion doesn't require any complicated explanation. But I do think that if you have people through standard perceptual learning mechanisms training on high-pass filter stimuli, doing something that they need to, which is tend to it. Attention is in many motions approach to amblyopia is that it's all about attention. And so if you have people attending to the high spatial frequencies, which they're usually not attending to, then you're
so this
gain control on those.
The high pass filtering may, rather than being a mechanism for reducing the dominance of the low frequencies, may be more of a mechanism for increasing the attention to the high spatial frequencies.
Perceptual learning, you need to depend on those because the information is no longer there. So I mean, I guess you don't really care which mechanism it is.
Right. So long as
you're not searching for low frequency that you're used to looking for.
Yes, although there could be a scaffold if you need to be led down this path of eventually relying only on high spatial frequencies. If you don't want to start from the deep end of the pool and you want to start with some low spatial frequencies and high spatial frequencies, and then gradually reduce the amount of low spatial frequencies.
But I think, and I don't know if I understood completely, but that, what we can't gloss over is also what kind of detrimental effect it could have introducing. Is that what you were saying? Because to me, that's what concerns me. If you're introducing it right at the outset of vision and you're essentially reducing access to low spatial frequencies or to certain type of information, might you be introducing some kind of the inability to use this information, because that's what it's really learned.
I mean, it's only during the training. So the other thing that
you don't think that it will translate?
No, I think
that's
it's
training.
you have access. But the good thing you can do with the high pass filter is you can jack up the contrast much more than you. The real world, as you showed with your wide over stimuli, there's not much contrast in high spatial regions. If you have a head-mounted display where you're putting the range that you have all in high spatial regions, that's not possible in the real world. Even with low pass filter or high pass filtering optics that can only remove information, whereas this you can. So I think it's a good idea.
That would, well, that connects with my earlier question. Is there any evidence of specific learning characteristics of learning, from patching that could be employed in stimuli that are presented?
I see.
VR to optimize this kind of cortical development, rather than just whole cloth high spatial frequency. And can tune it spatially, temporally, or even low frequency, high frequency relationships to audience.
I think there are tricks. I'm not an expert on perceptual learning, but there are tricks that you can import from those fields. But I think the main thing when is having the child actually take the dosage that they've been. So when it fails, it's usually because you give them a patch and they take it off when their parents aren't watching. And that's why they use alternative methods like eye drops, which directly people, and they can't do them. And they can't not comply. So that's the main reason that when it does work. So having them take the treatment and doing things like having them play video games with high pass filter content or watch movies with manipulated content.
One like tangential question. One failure mode of VR therapies quite often is that there's fatigue that comes when the user is playing with this VR headset for 2 hours a day, and this has been seen a lot in sighted individuals trying VR therapies. So my question is, have you thought about how this could introduce like extreme levels of fatigue if it's like not a fully sighted person trying to do this therapy consistently?
Yeah, so I've thought about that, but I don't have any answer to it. So in conventional patching, is it the case that the 2 hours of patching have to be continuous 2 hours, or can that be broken up into smaller sections?
Well, in fact, people get really, I think there might be even different regulations in different countries. Right now, we might think about a patch as a complete occlusion, but you could use a Bangladesh filter where you actually have light passing through, and then you can have different effects on the spatial frequency curve. Or just, so the idea is that you still have light outcome. So people play with both duration continuously or
nice.
And as far as I know, it's related really to the depth of suppression and to the success. So 2 components here, right? You want to monitor carefully, closely, with ideally very sensitive measures, and then that will determine your dosing in this sense. And the dosing really right now is type of patch and the duration. Yeah. So
yeah.
That's it.
And sorry, just to ask one more question related to Ashni's point. So is there a certain threshold minimum level of dosage of patching below which the treatment just doesn't work at all? So is it the case that you absolutely need at least 2 hours and anything less than that yields 0 results, or is there a gradient?
There's all these, this has been studied to death. You know, this it increases up to 2 hours and then it kind of levels up the benefit you get.
I see.
I think that they actually did a study and they were determining, because at the time they were thinking that they needed to patch all the time, and some poor children were forced to wear it all the time. And what they found was that they didn't need to. So they actually tested with the minimal amount of patching that they needed in order to get the best efficacy. And so it was determined that it would be 2 hours for a lower amount of amblyopia, and then just right now, and then the higher amblyopia, I think they would need to have 8 hours or 6 to 8 hours.
I see.
They are, just to spice this bit up, there is actually a very counterintuitive idea to patching, which has been used for neuroplasticity in that's 15 years or so, where you patch a normal sighted person, let's say one eye, for 2 hours, and then you move this.
Normally sighted.
So I'll patch you. Before the patching, we perform some visual function tests. Yeah. Binocular visual tests or other composite. And when removing that patch, we measure the difference between prior and post, and we see in the first 15 to 30 minutes that the formerly patched eye has a boosted performance. So it's
the patched eye
which you remove from and you unpatch it, sees boosts. So that's quite. There's a researcher called Claudia Jungi and so Lord has, especially Claudia Jungi. She's now in Paris. She has done a lot of work on this, both in terms of psychophysics, fMRI, GABA level measurements. So measuring the reversal of, let's say, the overshoot basically of compensation using different stimuli, colored or.
But is it both? Is it kind of like an after effect, or you just have this like overshoot of activity?
Exactly. There's some fading off, and people again they use now various psychophysical tools to investigate how long this lasts and whether we can then apply this to amblyopia. She, for example, did a study on amblyopes where we followed amblyopes, and they showed through treatment acuity was was, let's say, during I think half a year treatment time of 15 children or so, anisotrophic children, they show that acuity was, let's say, treated completely, so successfully, but binocular visual function in this case, so intraocular suppression was still unequal. So this is just one of many of these cases which show, well, the measure for treatment might not completely reflect the full recovery. And again, this speaks a little bit to 2 points. A, we should expand the arsenal of tests to assess how good we do this. Because this will be important there as well. Right? Especially think what images contain those spatial frequencies. And then the second part is perhaps we can even use, I mean, this is super speculative, different approaches to conventional patching. So temporal analysis. Other than the standard method of, choosing just one good and one bad eye, whether this is via acuity or via low spatial frequency area under the curve. So,
And is there evidence of not just normally sighted, but adults exhibiting this kind of bounce after?
I mean, this is usually done until, actually, we talked earlier about this. So again, there's a whole literature on adults, just normally sighted adults patching for 2 hours.
I think.
I'd say if you go to any meditation retreat, there's people who talk about it as well. Like if you sit in silent meditation with eyes closed for an extended period of time, the world becomes quite beautiful. It's anecdotal, but I bet if we get some psychophysics in there, they might be.
So the reports after dark retreats are kind of like that. So when people emerge from a dark retreat of a week in total darkness, they talk about how the world seems like it's crisp, it's highly colored. The visual qualities of the world seem to be much more compelling than it was before.
I wouldn't even notice it.
I'm just wondering, instead of just removing all the low spatial frequencies, what if you sort of took the extreme of that and instead just presented them with just images with very high spatial frequency content only? Just like a lot of, I don't know.
Or maybe like a video game that's filtered to high spatial frequencies.
So that is,
from Amblyopia that was just showing children greetings.
Yeah, just show them children greetings. Exactly.
Nobody wanted to do it.
So it's the video game idea, to make 1 hour or 2 hours. Sorry?
You have to do a video game, but I think that way, what you're saying maybe is like, you don't necessarily need the VR, like, can't you just
on a screen,
and then you wouldn't have the exhaustion effect. And the video game is not just attention, you're actually interacting with things, right?
Yeah. Well, so the performance on the video game already becomes a nice metric. So longitudinally, you are determining how well is the child able to deal with the high spatial frequency.
There might be, I mean, pushing a button is one kind of interaction, but imagine, with AR that you could, hold a block and actually see the high spatial frequency of that.
So we looked at VR a few years ago, and when we were talking about shape drawing for percussion, and we were thinking about some interactive Udemy game or something. And we had a lot of concerns about the introducing of a delay. So you're changing a really big confound if there's supposed to be visuomotor, synthesis that's happening at that moment, which may have, non-optical outcomes on visual utilization later.
So that delay issue, I think, has been addressed quite well. Caden, how much do we know how much is the lag between the video pass-through and reality?
I don't know the exact number, but I think it's below 15 milliseconds for the Vario. Maybe you know exactly the number?
No, I don't, but I could find out. I just know that the issues that other people have discussed, some of the concerns about eye exhaustion, I think depend on the type of display, and the Vario has been shown to be better than others in certain cases, and also pass-through has been really interesting to see actual reality. It's 20 milliseconds.
Well, I think, Kyle, that the what we were looking at the time had a really lag delay. So it was like, I remember walking into the room and immediately noticing it. So
Yeah, but we're in the, I don't think that's a even if it's at the edge of perception, I think it could be incredibly important. You're putting people into an uncanny valley. Like I popped on an Apple Vision Pro, which is pretty amazing AR. I would say it's probably one of the most real time, but it's not real time. And trying to do lip reading, which I still can rely on in certain situations, it was off enough, but maybe I'm like way too tuned into the thing.
well, that's also something that will get so sensitive to. I think. Yeah.
Right. And it's just that's an important compound. If, again, the sort of part of rehabilitation of functional vision, it's not just functional vision, unless you're training them to sit on a computer. It's functional vision in the context of being a creature in the world.
Yeah. But perhaps that issue of the lag between the real world and what you are observing, it could be ameliorated if what the child is doing is playing a video game. So with the video game, it's just the lag of the video game. I mean, it's
right.
It's not lag relative to anything. Yeah, it's just
lag.
Right.
And in VR, if you have motion controllers and you're doing, I mean, but yeah, it's just to stay within a realm where it's, that's a small amount of delay compared to the interaction that you're measuring.
Yeah.
Although kids today play it so much. So Aparna, who I go to with my son who has her business, and she's a few times told me to talk to you guys to see if what you guys are developing might help him because he won't do the regular. So he essentially has no depth perception, but he compensates for it really, really well. And he tells her, play soccer, I play video games. And she was like, doctor ordered, play video games, lots of video games. Because he's actually actively learning to use the muscles of the two eyes together. And so I think it's, you have to weigh the cost and benefit. And there are a lot of improvements in the lag. The lag, if you have auditory visual lag, that's something we're very sensitive to. So you're talking about lip reading, and that could be a big problem.
So I have one question. Given the context of severe binocular amblyopia, so to speak, I think a huge other problem next to the psychophysics and how we might tackle this is the ocular motility and the stability. So I assume that these children probably have a high this time.
They do.
So and that in itself, even without let's say perceptual problems, it's a huge non-trivial problem to counter, whether you use eye tracking devices or then try to simulate the world on the retina. So that I think that really warrants an own discussion as well.
It does. Yeah.
But also, how much could that actually account for their subpar acuity?
I think that needs to be that's true.
It's a ACAM problem, and then. So I don't have a sense for this, but we know this time without, let's say, cataracts. The price we work on ocular albinism, as you know, and in albinism, one of the features of the symptomology is nystagmus, and then obviously developmental changes on the structure of retina and the visual pathway, etc. So again, I wouldn't speak. I can't speak confidently in amblyopic children on the relation between these two factors, but it certainly interacts. Yes, so.
Right. So I would think that there is, for sure, a contribution of the nystagmic eye movements in terms of acuity loss, but it's not all of the acuity loss cannot be attributed to the nystagmus. You could present short duration stimuli.
People have stabilized things or compensated for.
It
doesn't. Right. Then their vision is worse.
It's worse.
Yeah.
Well, you're stabilizing for
Their vision is worse when they
Stabilize for nystagmus.
Dynamically change the stimulus on screen so that you compensate for the eye movement, the nystagmus eye movements.
and they found that the vision is worse then?
Because you're messing with their synthesis.
Who did this?
But it was about 25 years ago. I can send you the reference.
Yeah, if you could send the reference.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because
their visual system has developed to process slightly that are oscillating. Yeah, and you can induce oscillopsia if you do stabilize the image because they're used to the world moving backwards and forwards.
But with children who are kind of starting to just process and control information,
It's called oscillopsia, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've never met anyone with oscillopsia.
Yeah, it's like the world looks like it's moving even when you're still.
I have that. Quite funky.
So I know that people will very soon begin to have to leave, but I wanted to, given that Caden has already developed this, the high frequency, high pass filtering in the context of Vario or? Yeah. So if we were to, and this is an idea that I picked up from Seth, if we were to try something like this with normally sighted adults, that's why I was so interested in the report you were mentioning, what should we do to see whether there's any impact of, say, a couple of hours of the experience that Caden is offering us? Oh,
Can you see the slide? There's an eye tracker, but you really can't see it on.
Do you want to share? We can share.
Yeah.
You want to find it?
so while Daniel is sharing this, so
Sure.
what protocol can we devise to see whether there's any impact of even a short duration of cadence exposure?
So I see there's obviously within observer change of spatial frequency,
Right.
which should be better than a control group who is just doing without what we call multiple tests, because there's obviously just learning by repeating things. So I think you have to show that any improvement may reach the level of just doing something repetitively, or might even go beyond.
Yeah.
And that would be then proof that this actually is doing
Yeah.
more than, let's say,
Yes,
reinforcement.
reinforcement, right. So what should be the visual assessments that we should conduct at the beginning and at the end of this intervention? I mean, would it make sense to do contrast sensitivity?
Yeah, contrast sensitivity function for sure.
Mhm.
Because you want to look at what happens to low spatial frequency sensitivity.
Yeah.
If you turn that off for some period of time, you might get the elevation of low spatial frequency contrast sensitivity, as well as the elevation of high spatial frequency because you've been attending to those. But you definitely check out Steve Engels because he did that.
Okay.
Right. What else did he do?
I mean, he did rivalry combination, he did all sorts of things. I remember he gave once when I was in England, he gave a talk about all this. But yeah, it's very dimly remember that.
I see.
But does it last long enough that you could throw somebody in EEG and see some measured result to?
He did this, I think, he combined, I remember one of the first people who combined FMI and EEG, I think, for this.
For this one.
But I again, take a grain of salt, but I will still remember that I thought, oh, that's very, very ambitious and very interesting to roll up these two technologies together. Yeah, that would be also my go-to.
So, because the behavioral one's also fatigue. So you do some pre-tests, you put them through an activity, you do some post-test. Even during that testing, you're going to have some funny fatigue stuff, I imagine.
Yeah.
Don't you think that it's worth though, like Jan says, like also looking at some higher level functioning, because it may be that you don't actually see changes in acuity, but it is, or specifically in high spatial frequencies, but it is actually being integrated into a task. Providing some kind of information.
For sure. So CSF is just one of the assessments, but we should have a battery of
higher level.
But in
stereo.
But I think when let's say you want to run a proof of concept within a typical sighted population, just to show the contrast sensitivity, let's say, to test that hypothesis. When you think about it, in a typical sighted, you actually increase the difference between the eyes artificially for some time, and therefore I wouldn't expect an improvement of stereo vision. Whereas in a percussion, or let's say in a binocularly impaired, there might be something. So in a clinical population with a disrupted binocular visual function, such as stereo acuity or intraocular suppression, I would do that too. And then again, it wouldn't hurt to look beyond binocular cells, let's say.
I remember during gameplay, you could add and reduce filter effects to see if their normal progression is affected by removing or adding. So you could even look in gameplay real time. Is there sort of a,
Yeah, theoretically, you can get to a point where the experience is actually also testing and you can do some kind of staircase so that you can be able
We
to.
should be able
Can
to.
we take over your share screen for that into show?
Yeah, because I can exit.
Yeah, we can do it.
Like if somebody can play a game enough where you can predict with high enough confidence what you think they should do in the next section, and they do something well outside of distribution, then maybe because you applied a filter, you can kind of really cleanly say that environmental impact was the thing.
Yep. So, Keaton, we are assuming things about what you've done. You want to say a little?
The 2-minute overview. So we just built this 2 nights ago with D and I. So it's very early on, just an MVP. But it's built on the Vario XR3, which is a VR headset that has pass-through. So there's 2 very high-resolution, full-color cameras facing out, directly aligned with your eyes. And this was kind of the first step where we were just running pass-through. So what the Vario allows you to do is you can apply a shader, which is a concept from computer graphics. You can basically run a transform on the incoming image that is going to then be shown to you. And since it's this really low level running on the GPU, it's incredibly low latency. So that first example that Dee was just showing was just the shader that came with the system. And then this is us running the high pass filter. So basically how it works is a little, I guess you can see, basically how it's working is there's a blur that's running across the entire image, and that's essentially your low pass filter. And then we subtract the low pass image from the original image, and that gives us a high pass image, and then we push that out, and that is what's shown to the user. So you can play with parameters to change the, the cutoff frequency, and we've actually multiplied the colors in the end so that they're more intense. And I guess the only thing worth mentioning is you can see a bug here, which is that black box, which is tracking actually our vision. And we don't have it fixed in the video, but we figured out by the end, it's because the Vario does foveated rendering. So it's a higher resolution wherever you look. And so we just have to change some of the parameters in only that box so that the filter is continuous throughout the entire thing. Basically change the size of the kernel of the blur. And so, I mean, we'll do that immediately. We made this in a few hours 2 nights ago, but
So you can control the gaze also and change whether or not it's going to be high pass or not, or that's really get nice input on eye tracking.
And this has 20 millisecond.
Below 20 milliseconds.
Below
So
20 milliseconds?
in the research, they've shown that it becomes imperceptible once you get below 20 milliseconds, and Vario's taken that to heart. So they're they don't give an exact number, but
yeah, it's below.
Yeah.
It sort of depends how many filters you're applying, but
doing
really
it might be
beautiful low level.
the intensity of your shader that you're applying. Yeah.
And are you Keaton Pierce?
I am, yes.
Hey man.
Hey.
Drop me an email, dude.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Does it help if I'm friends with Pawan?
You guys are close. Yeah, we'll talk.
All right. I could get you research subjects if that's what excites you. I got money, I got research subjects.
In connection with this imagery, I would just mention that Ganit, the fellow Justin, who's not here, and I did a little experiment feeding neuromorphic camera imagery through a headset. It's 2D right now, but nevertheless, it's it's quite like this, but of course it's affected by the motion of the head of the viewer. And so there's a kind of, there's an interaction there that's a little different than this, so you could open up the difference and have that be a more salient interactive aspect. And also there's so many parameters in that camera, and it's so fast that it's like you could tweak it in many different ways in terms of the specific spatial frequency, the latency of the image, and so forth. So that seems to us kind of an interesting tool, perhaps.
Do you have this headset available for children? So is there a small version for this?
No,
because that will be I think the ultimate goal then in the end, right?
Yep.
If anyone wants to try, you're welcome to come by and say hi.
We will, absolutely. So, Caden, is there any technical challenge in instead of having the video pass through be filtered, if it's just the output of a video game that needs to be filtered?
There shouldn't be, no. Yeah, it depends on, like if you're running the game yourself, you could just apply that shader on the output as if it's like our own game. I'm not sure how it would work if we're using just some kind of like commercial game, but even then we could probably apply just a filter on the display before it comes out. So I don't see why not.
So you can stream video into this thing.
So we probably, if we were doing it with a video game, we probably wouldn't be using the Vario's native SDK because that's specially set up for the pass-through. We probably do it with a different approach, but I mean, the same like shader could be applied.
Yeah. And another theory is just to have them use it as pass-through while playing it on a screen.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to be, again, we could go back to the VR thing. Because I remember one of the things we talked about years ago was blurring and reducing blur. How people do everyday tasks on a computer and things may result in quicker, more robust learning. So there's a huge utility for the pass-through filter that I never cracked, man. Congratulations.
There is a big cost, like you're mentioning about having one for kids, and there is a big cost to having the headset. So I think it would be sort of like, if we're taking advantage of mixed reality, you know, you're interacting with the world around you, which to me, it seems like there's a lot of power in that. But if you're doing that, then it makes sense. Like, let's try to figure out the VR headset. But if it's just a game where there's a controller or something, I would question using VR headset because there's like you mentioned with fatigue and, you know, the cost, like this is an $8,000 headset and you need a big GPU setup and everything. Like if it can be done on a screen, it's going to be way, you know, you can bring a bunch of laptops to India, but I don't know how many Vario XR3s.
So I see, I know there's one startup who did some gamification so that pitch was amblyopia treatment for adults, and obviously neuroplasticity is reduced, so you have to be careful. They did VR last, I think I saw it last 2 years at Optometry meeting. And there's an Israeli company, Vision, and they do use also dichoptic, anadromtic glasses on dichoptic treatment. So to get around all these, let's say, practical problems, right, of weight, size of a headset, and all these things, right? Because that's, I think, that's probably, I would think this is probably the hardest challenge, the utility of the device and the acceptance. Again, the first time when I went to a hospital to do during my optometry residency, I worked with an ophthalmologist who specialized in pediatrics. And first thing she said, was stuck with me. Children are not little adults. That's extremely important, especially when children have visual impairments, right? And when we talk about visual impairments, which are even on that continuum, is severe. So I think when developing this, I just want to mentioning that and considering these practical challenges is something worthy on the head of a nose, which is not fully developed. That's something.
We tried the eye tracker headsets with them, even the like really light. What's the one from Berlin? The one that we tried.
Pupil labs,
which is very light. I was told that they take it off.
And I'm not surprised. Again, everyone has ever tried to fit glasses on children. Even adults. It's not.
I think your point is right. Like, there's a lot that can be achieved just from on-screen filtering, and it would make life a lot easier. But then again, the interaction definitely, it's not just intuitively powerful. Like, it is powerful. You have the motor system firing up at the same time as you have the visual system, and there's a lot of really important learning that can happen there.
But think about the scale. If we could do a, downloadable app that filters on things, you can send that out to.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you have to think of it as two different things.
And there's an in-between as well, which is phone-based AR, right? That's quite advanced now, where you can just walk around with a smartphone and be running that same shader. It doesn't necessarily have to be a headset.
You run on the MetaQuest 3, it just runs the eye tracking and everything.
Yeah, a smaller, lighter, cheaper headset.
Yeah. I wonder if anyone could comment on the effectiveness of gaming. I mean, I can understand that obviously visual attention engagement, some form of interaction. But it also makes me wonder if there are other possibilities. Specifically, I was thinking, the gaming is kind of a flow that you receive. And I wondered about possible gaming that would be more constructive and creative, even in relation to art, maybe, because, I think there's something, given that this is a cortical problem, is there something to be gained by a kind of, kind of creative function to the stimuli, that the user is actually generating stimuli, perhaps at a low level and building up. They're a learning advantage.
And self-regulating timing and speed. And,
So some work that a very talented undergraduate did a couple of years ago, Alyssa O'Neill, she's now at Stanford. So it was looking at the act of drawing and seeing how they're drawing, how a person's drawing differed from a reference. That seemed to make a big difference in terms of how much the person improved. So
How different
tracing.
the subject of the book?
So a subject is given figures to trace with their left hand. So they are tracing with their left hand, either with a non-functional pen or a functioning pen. And a functioning pen is leaving a track, and they are able to see what error they are making. And that makes a big difference.
Well, it might be the error, it might be, I have other things as well, but yeah. No, we talk about it in paper, but yeah, I have to run, even though I really hate to run right now. But is it okay if I go to the course?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's Wednesday 2 to 5.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the poster also, so I'll take a picture. But that question that you just asked now is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and also talking to some people here about lately. And so if it's okay, I'd like to reach out later and maybe talk about it more.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
So in the short term, I think we should try to figure out a protocol that we could use with the system Ketan has developed to have a small set of assessments prior to the intervention and then have the same assessment post and see whether there's any indication that we are making some change in the perceptual quality or the perceptual experience of the individual. So we should think about what is the minimum that we need to do in terms of assessments. What is the basic assessment that we should have? Contrast sensitivity seems to be an obvious one. Whether there are any others that we should include in the test battery. And then what should be the intervention? What should be the duration of that intervention? So we know that we're not cutting off the intervention too early.
And the type, AR versus VR.
Yep. So can we come up with, as the last thing we do, can we come up with a very basic outline of what we would want to do? So CSF, contrast sensitivity function, and then how long of an intervention do you think it should be?
I mean, again, it's really dependent on what we talk about proof of concept in adults.
Adults.
Vision pattern.
Adults, normally sighted adults.
Yeah, who should they use as subjects for these tests? Each other with their...
Yeah, normally sighted. I mean, we are making this as hard as possible to see a change. We're working with adults, they're normally sighted, maybe the brain is already working at capacity, but that would make a positive result that much more intriguing and interesting.
I think it would be important to have an active task. I really think you're right that active participation is different, likely more effective than just passively watching TV. So at a minimum, a video game where you're engaged, but if you had something where you
Minecraft, basically something like this.
Yeah, something
where you do creatively do something.
So we're ready.
But it's a bit hard
because I develop anything, but we were thinking about drawing in depth space. Maybe not for this application, but I think the drawing connection is.
Would a physical integration matter? Like if it was not just a virtual experience, but there was an
Bring moving blocks around or something.
would that matter?
You mean an actual tactile task or an augmented?
Either. I don't know. Maybe for attention.
It's interesting to do would be to wear the device pass through mode, and then everything you see it's quite possible in your own hands. But that would give you the active engagement.
Yeah,
I think would be important.
Yeah, like
But I don't know.
playing with blocks, or could a puzzle make
Put a
sense?
puzzle together and
Yeah.
yeah.
Just take one from you.
Yeah, so I think if you want to, because then there are so many variables which you can then immediately test, right? The interaction with tactility and all these things. If you want to do this, then I would just give a simple task just to see whether there's an interaction between these two things. Because otherwise, I can see that the not only the augmented part, then the stimulus control is one, but also then is there a difference between, let's say, a certain tactile task, whatever the tactile or weighted tactile task, whatever that is. So I can see there are a lot of layers, and then in the end, we would like to find out what drive, if we see an effect, what is it, these things, right? So I think we probably want to put some thought into these layers, let's say attention and creativity and perhaps tactility, and just bring this up.
So would I think Ken was mentioning? Oh, Tracy, sorry.
I have a question. When the children receive the cataract surgery, do they get the intraocular lens and it's set for distance or?
It's set for 6 feet.
Oh.
So for both very near work and for distance vision, they need to be provided.
So
bifocals.
idealistically, it's actually better to have a VR headset because it's like used for distance, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
The VR headset, it's set for like a distance type of task, right? So is that the ideal reason behind using a virtual reality headset? Or?
So I think that's a great point, but my thinking was somewhat more simple-minded. My thinking was driven more by having this intervention be essentially fan field to fill up your visual field with the outcome of the high-pass filtering. I don't know whether that's critical, but again, I'm being driven by the intervention for conventional amblyopia, where you're getting rid of the entire visual field from one eye. So I don't know whether they patching just a small section of the visual field in the good eye has as much of an impact as patching the entire eye, or whether that.
Yeah, and then Nova Vision, there's an Israeli group called Nova Vision that has against contingent amblyopia therapy, where they leave the peripheral vision field
in the good eye.
In the good eye, so they impair vision in the fovea of the good eye in the case of so they can be both peripherally they're the same.
I see.
Probably the amblyopia eye has modified.
And what do they report?
They claim the outcomes are better, but it's
there was a study I mentioned earlier where we show the correlation between, let's say, numbers of treatment hours and treatment success. So typical fun.
it's a company funded studies.
Yeah. So, but I think they might. The time they were looking for FDA clearance. I don't know where they are right now, but they are then.
Okay, so to keep things simple, if the constructive task while the person is wearing a VR headset, if the task were to be putting together a jigsaw puzzle with high contrast patterns on the jigsaw, so they come through after the high-pass filtering, and they do this, say, for an hour every day, so one jigsaw puzzle every day for a couple of weeks, is that enough?
I would check the angle. I don't know if you go back to him.
Okay.
I really do think he has looked at the duration of exposure.
I see.
It's variable.
Yeah.
So,
And are you using jigsaw just as an example? Because I don't think that's very engaging.
Oh, you don't think?
No, for some people, For children, I mean, like something that already.
This will be adults, right?
Yeah, like something that went viral and like, I don't know, Candy Crush, whatever people play and can stop kind of thing.
Mm.
That would be, that already went viral, but no, and just adapt it.
Yeah, and that's IRB, you will have to answer in two questions, because if you do this short-term decoration experiment type, which I described earlier, then you will, let's say, typically 2 hours, and I know Robert has numbers looked at shortening this and showing similar effects. Let's say you do this 2 hours pre and post, and then after the first 15 minutes, you just compare the results. That's one thing, because, you know, there's a recovery, but then if you do this now prolonged in a healthy adult, then the question is actually, so you will then immediately get into, well, how do we know actually that it recovers? And I'm sure England must have looked into this because they faced it. And I remember that at the time I talked with him about, you know, inhibition and Vietnam, and that's when you induce a double vision for a prolonged time, or superimposition of rivalrous conflicts. So if you do this for a short time, it's fine. But if you do it in prolonged, right, then I think well, one has to be careful. So I think for the proof of concept, you probably want to do more, you know, from that ethical standpoint. More proof of concept in the short domain, just so is there actually anything happening, and then one downline can develop where because it's obviously a cost benefit and analysis in children. If you say, okay, you have a proof of concept, I want to help those children, and we try this for them. So longer period of time.
No, I take the point. So it seems like the paper by Steve Engel is an important one for us to get our hands on. There is a publication.
There are a few, but they're all about 15 years old. So, yeah, his VR computer was on a cart. It's old school.
I see. Caden, might you be interested in taking a look at that
absolutely,
publication? Yeah. Okay, so maybe a to-do for us could be if you were to take a look, and then we could, whatever subset of the current group would like to meet, to hear a synopsis of the key findings.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll look for the paper as well. Then I'll if you can send in your email address.
Yeah.
Although you won't reply, apparently.
And if there are any other papers that you think we should benefit from reading. Okay, so should we give ourselves a time frame to reconvene? Okay. Next.
An hour?
An hour break, and then after.
So there's this movie, Margin Call, and that has this kind of deadline. So it's about the Lehman Brothers collapse, and the company is getting ready to pitch or to try to sell off all of its garbage bonds. And the meetings are happening in the middle of the night. And Jeremy Irons, who is the CEO of the company, he gives the group an hour to prepare all of their documents. So at 5 a.m. they are to meet again. They're meeting at 3 a.m. and then meet at 5. So yes. See at 9.
So there's a precedent for it.
There's a precedent for it. Well, what do people think? I don't want to unilaterally impose. 1 week, 2 weeks.
And we used the held meeting as a reconvening at this time.
Yeah. 2 weeks? Or
We have somebody.
we have those? 2 weeks? I thought it was.
Yeah, we
this
have
is slot.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
I would offer, if
So one-
while we're here or everyone's here, if anyone did want to try the simulation, we could walk over and I could at the media lab now. I mean, I'm open to it. It's on the 3rd floor in Tangible Media Group.
I always wanted them to
Really there.
work to above, so that's the